Tim Sullivan, thank you so much for your time to speak with me on the Real Clear Values podcast.
It's a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity to speak.
Tim, you and I have known each other since, well, earlier in 2021 when you were working with me and my wife, Rachel, for a short period of time. And I very much benefited from that personally, and particularly in relation to your perspective that you offer through Chinese medicine. And it's quite interesting because you, as I understand it, you didn't grow up in China or in the East, you grew up in the UK. So the first question I've got for you today is, how long have you practiced Chinese medicine and how did you get into it in the first place?
Well, long-winded way. I graduated in Totnes in 2005 and in acupuncture in 2006. About a 3-year course for acupuncture, a 2-year course for Totnes. Before that, I was working in all sorts of different areas. So before that, I'd been studying reflexology, I'd been studying acupressure, I've been studying bioenergetic healing, I've been studying with faith healers from Brazil, and all of them were quite amazing, but none of them really kind of, for me, answered the question of kind of what is it we're actually doing and what's actually happening. I was working with this psychic surgeon, and he was one of the most accomplished healers I've ever come across, but he couldn't really say what he was doing. And it led me to kind of come to Chinese medicine as a way to kind of answer all these questions. And whilst I was studying acupuncture, I found that it didn't really answer the questions either. I was looking for some kind of emotional anatomy or energetic anatomy or spiritual anatomy. And I don't think those questions are very easy to answer in these kinds of places. It wasn't until I was in the second year of acupuncture college that I came across my teacher, who's a Daoist priest. And I've been studying with him ever since.
Interesting. So Taoism is sort of the area that you're rooted in. Is that fair to say that you would see that as the main approach, the main philosophy, if you like, that you would adopt in your teaching practice or your healing practice, should I say?
The trouble is, Chinese medicine is really a big argument over faith. So it's really an argument between Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. And really, it's a question of where do you stand and what do you value. So in Confucianism, they value the importance of hierarchy, of family, of the state, of following a path that is right and moral and correct. And in the West, we might see that as a little bit authoritarian. The Taoist community tends to be following the idea that the individual is the most important, and it's important to find authenticity in our own nature. And there is no right answer to any of these questions. It's just a question of where you stand and how you can meet your patient. And the most important thing when you meet your patient is to not invalidate your patient's perspective and make them wrong. Because most of the disease and a lot of the cause of disease is going to be based in the beliefs that people have and whether they are in concordance with their nature or whether they're in concordance with their morality or their view or God, or however you want to describe that.
There's certainly a lot to that. So you mentioned Taoism and you've broken that down for us a little bit there. Have you got anything else to say in terms of the core principles and the core tenets of Taoism in relation to your practice of Chinese medicine? Because this is something that you talk about authenticity and people, finding their own authenticity, and you not making people wrong or wanting to make people wrong as a practitioner. So what are some of the core principles that are at play here that you're mindful of when you're treating people?
For me, Taoism is something that's very difficult to talk about, because as soon as you describe it, the classic line in Taoism is, as soon as you describe the Tao, that's not the Tao. So for me, I answer the question in terms of being open to not knowing, being open to mystery, being open to the divine. And the way it comes around in understanding is, in where I treat, is being open to paradox. So being open to two conflicting things at the same time. So, for example, if you're working with Tuina, which is Chinese medical massage, so rather it's acupuncture without the needles. So the fundamental way that you engage with your patients in terms of a technique that you may apply, you'd need to have a focus of the technique. So the technique has a particular structure, but you also need to be relaxed. And so you have this paradoxical way you meet, and then as a consequence, if you don't have a expectation, you can meet the person where they are, and it's it's tricky to let go of expectations, because you have the expectation of being the healer and the one who knows, which is a bit of a, from my perspective and how I describe that, as a bit of a trap, because then as soon as you're working with that, you're not really relating to the patients. So a lot of it is about how you relate to the patient with where they are, and the ways in which people resist their nature, or hide their nature, or think that their nature should be something other than it is. It's an interesting quandary.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want to trivialize this in any way, shape, or form, but what you were saying just there about this paradoxical nature of just being without definitely knowing, and meeting people where they are, it reminded me of Bruce Lee saying in one of his films about being like water. You know, sometimes water just flows and sometimes it crashes, and essentially ensuring that you're fit for purpose in relation to the person you're treating as a practitioner. Is that fair to say?
I suppose it could be looked like that. I mean, it's like, I like to describe, it's like meditation is very often a catch-all thing to treat everyone, or everyone should meditate and everyone should find their way. And I love the description of meditation from my teacher. You know, it's like he talks about it in terms of 4 stages. So first of all, when you learn to meditate, the main goal is to learn to relax. And so if you're relaxing, it's very important that you don't lie down on your back, because if you practice relaxation on your back, you'll fall asleep. So you're practicing the skill of relaxing, and that might be the way some people describe as body scanning. That might be kind of listening to your feet and then listening to your shins and listening. There's all different techniques for practicing relaxation. You know, feeling the breath, feeling where it is in the belly, you know, just working with ways of letting go. And then when you have practiced relaxation to the point where you can feel free and you're not holding, you start practicing a technique that develops focus. So similar to the Tuina, relaxation and focus are the same sort of principles of a paradoxical place. So in a relaxed state, you then may count your breaths if you're going down a particular Buddhist way of focusing, or looking at a candle flame, or working with a mantra or a mudra. And so you practice, can you remain focused? And the way you tell that would be maybe counting your breath to 100 without losing place. And when you come back, when you lose your place, go back to 1 again. And if you can go all the way to 100, you've tested your focus, and now you focus and relax at the same time. And now you can actually engage with meditation proper. So you're relaxed state, you're focusing, and then all your shit comes up to haunt you. And it's learning when you are too focused and intent on a particular thought or an idea, you come back to relaxation if you need it. And when you're drifting too far away, you come back to a focus if you need it. And in that space, you're playing with the relationship between relaxation and focus, and as a consequence, digestion takes place. In that space where you're aware and you're relaxed, digestion takes place. And that, I think, is a very good analogy for working with patients. You're trying to help them be relaxed and be aware. And in that space, all the things that they've been avoiding come up to haunt them. And often the dis-ease is a sense that I shouldn't be suffering from this, I should be this, I should be that. And often the actual disease is a self-regulating cure, where if you have a condition that you're suffering from, often the resistance to that disease is the inflammation that you feel around that, and the stress you feel around that. And often the digestive process is a process which we don't want to go down, and that's usually uncomfortable. So
Yeah.
if we're digesting a surplus of emotions or a surplus of inflammation and physical stress, usually the body is going to digest it in a way that's probably uncomfortable. And then it's helping people feel comfortable with that process where they can then come back into contact again with a living within their means, whatever that
Yeah.
may be.
Yeah. Wow. There's so much to unpick from what you just said there, Tim. I love this point that you make about I love the point you make about digestion, because I think this is so important, so important, because like you say, digestion is necessary in terms of processing. We typically think about digestion in relation to food, don't we? We think about eating our food and eating slowly and sitting down and not being distracted and being relaxed while we're eating our food so that we can digest properly. But you're talking about digestion in terms of how we deal with what's thrown at us by life itself, aren't you? In terms of our emotions and our psyche. Is that correct?
Well, the difference between digestion and psychology or psychotherapy from a Chinese perspective is opposite sides of the same coin. It's just the language that you choose to use to describe it. So a nutritional therapist and a psychotherapist have the same theoretical understanding from a Chinese perspective. They just may use different structures of the body to describe that process. So it's like you have to rest to digest. You know, it's like the more relaxed you are, the more you're able to digest in one sitting. You have a capacity. So when you are emotionally overloaded, as we are always in life, there are strategies in the body that move you from a healing position, which is digesting, to a storing position, which means that you then don't have to deal with the problem. So we have all these capacities in our system to store. And unfortunately, when we reach a fullness in that capacity, it means that we are no longer able to store anymore, and we have to deal with what's there. And often we then lose diplomacy, we lose our calmness, we lose homeostasis in the body, and stress and inflammation physically might be arthritic pain, inflammatory bowel disorders, you name it. There's all sorts of different ways to describe it. But if you can come back into an alignment with the capacities that you actually have, and you have a surplus, your body will naturally digest, and naturally you probably won't like it because it's horrible. But if you have a good relationship with it and you know what good digestion feels like, then you know the difference between something getting better and something getting worse. So our differentiation with all of that is your capacity to rest and capacity to sleep. If you can rest and sleep and you're feeling like shit, it's a good sign. And if you can't rest and sleep, it's a sign probably that you're on course for a chronic degenerative disease or a psychological overwhelm.
Very interesting. So it sounds to me, Tim, from what you're saying, that there are a couple of things here in terms of the individual. So the individual can do several different things to aid the digestion process. So things like you've mentioned, things like meditation, things like sleep, these sorts of things. So as a practitioner, besides encouraging people to do these things like meditation and like this digestion process and going through the feeling of things and going through that process rather than numbing it or avoiding it altogether, what's your role then in facilitating healing for the individual through acupuncture and tuina, etc.?
Well, there's a couple of ways you can look at it. So, I mean, there are 4 main strategies you're looking at healing and how to help with healing. So the first strategy would be purging. So in which case you help the patient release the overload in their system. So you'd be encouraging the body to purge and release. So it'd be encouraging sweating, you'd be encouraging vomiting, you'd be encouraging headaches, you'd be encouraging voiding the bowels and the bladder, all the good stuff involving fluids of the body is the ways the body has of purging. So when there's an overload, you need a medium to carry that pathology out. And you need the energy to push that out, and you need to make sure the routes of elimination are free. So that would be one strategy you have with patients. And it's a heroic strategy. You know, it's a strategy that most people like to do in the West because it's like, yeah, detox, let's get rid of this stuff. I don't want it, get rid of it. And it's strong, and it can be too strong for a lot of people. And that's the main criticism of it, is that it's great for people who are healthy and fit, but it's not very good for people who are weak. Because if you're constantly purging and you're weak, it's going to be difficult. So this is the main theory of the school of attacking and purging. So this is one of the four great, this is where my knowledge is, take it with a grain of salt. You know, I work with a practical understanding. My academic understanding is okay, but I would say it's not infallible. But the school of attacking and purging was a school that was developed, I think, around the 11th, 12th century. And then the natural criticism of that comes out. And in Chinese medicine, the criticism comes from the school of tonifying earth. And the school of tonifying earth says, why are you trying to purge everyone? That's really dangerous. Surely the best thing to do is just build everyone up. If you build up their digestive capacity, you build up their surplus, then the body will naturally release and purge when it has sufficiency in the system. And then the school of tonifying the kidneys comes along and says, well, why are you tonifying, you know, the exterior ways we have resources? If you tonify instead of tonifying someone's current account, you tonify their life savings, then what happens is if their life savings are good, then what's going to happen is their current account will be good. And then when there's sufficiency, they will naturally purge. And then the last school comes in and says, why the hell are you trying to do that? You know, it's terrible. There might be all sorts of stuff in the DNA, all sorts of stuff in the life savings that you need to get rid of. The school of cooling and cold comes along and says, get rid of the addictions, all the kind of the pathologies that are deep in the DNA, or deep in your nature with your relationship with God, or deep in the way that you are relating to your intrinsic nature. And as a consequence, you will naturally have a surplus in your life savings, which will naturally lead to surplus in your current account, which will naturally lead to a purging. And then the first school comes along and says, why are you doing all that fat? Why don't you just purge? So there's never a right answer. You're always going in these circles because you're always kind of relating to where the patient is and you're meeting them. So these schools you could describe as purging, adapting, harmonizing and tonifying. And so when you're looking at the school of adaptation, what you're really saying is when we adapt to deal with a stressful situation, we go into storage mode rather than healing mode. And so this relates the same to trauma and stress as it does to physical diseases. And so what you're trying to do in that situation is help people relax the body armoring of the body, and you're trying to help give them enough resources so that they can then reach a point where there's sufficiency for them to actually release, and they're not stuck in an idea of how they think the world is, because often trauma is more, we want to relate to a story about ourselves or the world or other people, rather than actual reality of how other people are, how we are, and how the world is. And that's a very important part of a lot of the work I do, is helping people look at the stories they have about the way they see the world, the way they see themselves, the way they see God. And often they are created from trauma and overwhelm. And as a consequence, they are stories that aren't necessarily of service in the longer term. They're very helpful to cope, but and it may be dangerous to unpick that too quickly, because then how do you deal with life if you don't have that story that keeps you sane?
Yeah, absolutely.
So
Yeah,
that's
wow.
Then you've got the other part, which is why bother trying to deal with adaptation and purging? Why don't you just help someone come back into relationship with their intrinsic nature, and all their social programming, all of the stuff with the stories they say about themselves doesn't really matter, because as long as they're in relationship with themselves, and this is where you might see like 5 elemental acupuncture come in, or sort of acupuncture terms which are not concerned so much with the physical diseases people have, but are more concerned with the relationships people have to themselves or to nature or to God. And so this is where you start helping people come into harmony with their intrinsic nature themselves. And the last thing is tonification, which is basically it's a stopgap. You know, it's like, I'll give you energy, and as I give you energy, you know, it lets you it's like getting a extra loan capacity in your banking system. You know, it doesn't really help in the long run. But what the secret of it is if you can live within your means, if you can you can increase your income and decrease your expenditure, you will have infinite wealth and infinite health. Well, as much as your destiny lets you, or as much as accidents and trauma let you, or as much as your own stories and ideas you have about yourself let you.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you bring the stories that we tell ourselves into this, especially in relation to trauma. I've been in an entirely different field and area of focus. I've been reading a lot about deaths of despair, which doesn't sound like particularly cheery stuff, but I think it's fundamental to understand what's happening in the West at the moment. It's quite a phenomenon, especially in the US, and I believe it's a growing problem in the UK. And
well, the fundamental thing from my perspective is that it's okay to feel what you feel.
Yeah,
because that's
yeah,
how you digest it. And if you don't let yourself feel despair, and if you don't let yourself feel anger, and if you don't let yourself feel the pain of where you are, you can't relate with it. And if you can't relate with it, you can't digest it,
no,
because you're very
exactly.
busy somewhere other than where you are.
Yeah,
And in the
yeah,
West, we have a sense of we really should be fit, we should be healthy, we should be productive, we should be good, we should be all the list of things. And as a consequence, all the things that we feel that aren't that, we can relegate away. And which is where you start coming to a lot of the fundamentals of Eastern philosophy, which is rooted in the fundamental thing of I want this and I don't want that.
yeah,
And as soon as you have that, you have separation, you have dualistic perspective, and you then lose all perspective of yourself and the world. Well, I don't lose all, but it makes you have a biased perspective of
yeah,
yourself, the world, and other people.
yeah,
And coming back to the truth is coming back to is being able to equally be okay with being in pain and being happy. It's like
yes,
that's just the way it is, or being
yeah,
sad and being happy.
yeah, absolutely. I think that's so important, like you say, about that duality. And coming back to my point about deaths of despair, the thing about despair and the deaths of despair is that a lot of people who fall on foul of deaths of despair are people who, I mean, despair really defined as my life hasn't gone the way that I expected it to go.
Yeah.
And it comes back to what you were saying about expectation. Expectation, the stories that people tell themselves and the stories that people's parents have told them growing up. Oh, well, you're going to do this, then you're going to do that, then you're going to do the other. And of course, we all know that life doesn't work like that, because something comes from the outside and knocks you right off that track and onto another track. And it's accepting that is what it is, and that it isn't necessarily a wrong thing. It's just not what you expected it to be. And that's where I think your point about digestion is so important, because what I feel in the West we tend to do is we look a lot at the quick fixes. So it's like you were saying about being in pain, but also moving forward as well. You know, you can be in pain, but you can be happy. You can be in pain, but you can be successful, and all these other things. And looking at that in a multifaceted way, rather than this setting up this dichotomy between, okay, so things didn't work out as I expected them to do, therefore I failed, therefore I have let people down, therefore, you know, all these other things that come into play because it's outside of the script that has either been given to you and you've accepted, or that you've created yourself with some tweaks. I think it's really important to stress that actually we can take our time in making these assessments about, you know, we're in such a hurry in the West, aren't we? Because deaths of despair, you know, what is causing these things? The authors that I read on this, Anne Case and Angus Deaton, who wrote a book called Deaths of Despair, they actually talk about the causes of deaths of despair being outright suicide, drug overdose, or alcohol abuse. Those are the three main things, you know, like the three main things that cause a death of despair. Now, you don't know with drug overdose and alcohol abuse, you don't necessarily know if they're intentional or not. It's very difficult to say whether somebody intends to overdose and end it right there or not. But I think what you're talking about really gets to the heart of this idea of not wanting to digest, of wanting to say, this is bad, turn it off. You know, it's kind of like if you've got a TV or something mechanical, you turn it off. If you don't like it, you turn it off. If you don't like the show, you turn it off. If you don't like what's on the cinema, you leave the room. But life doesn't work like that, does it? So how do you think we can introduce this idea of digestion to more people, where they don't feel that they have to numb the pain, that they have to kill the pain at all costs?
Well, that's a big one.
Easy one, eh?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a couple of ways, or there's lots of different ways we can approach it from a Chinese perspective. So we have these models of understanding expectation. We call it the psychosocial low vessels. So they're a model basically of psychological development. And they start off following the sequence of the meridians, describing each of the different capacities of what the body represents in terms of how it digests and deals with situations. So it starts off with you're born, and then the lungs give you the capacity, not necessarily the lungs in terms of physically, but the lung meridian is really responsibility for boundaries, responsibility for bonding with mother. So the way we have skin to skin contact. And when that is overstimulated or not stimulated enough, we then create systems where then the body then gets very agitated, and it then sets like the importance of having bonding time with the baby and mother when the heart rate is very low, so that the baby assumes that that's the natural rate at which the heart rate is for a calm, loving bond. If it's very, very fast, then what's going to happen is the baby is going to try and assimilate that as that's normal. And we can develop, in terms of the West, maybe describe as ADHD type signs and symptoms, as that becomes the normal baseline of the baby. If there's too much stimulation, too much sound, too much things happening, then the baby will then cut off and not want to be touched. The baby will cut off from wanting any kind of stimulation or touch, which is the start of autistic kind of patterns in the system from a Chinese perspective. Again, it's difficult to say exactly that this is what's going on, because you're dealing with a Western system and an Eastern system. But it's interesting to connect the things that can be drawn that might be helpful in helping Western and Eastern people who are interested in both of those things can help inform each other, because these models are very helpful. Then the large intestine comes in, and the large intestine is can we digest the stimulation we're receiving? And what happens with the large intestine is it's the capacity to say no, is the capacity to reject. And so a good large intestine meridian enables the baby to vomit. So this is why the baby takes the milk, takes the food, it's like, I didn't like that, but gets rid of it. It's a good sign, because the body is able to reject. This is a sign when teeth start coming through. With teething, we can start chewing and breaking things down for ourselves, becoming a bit more independent as we start moving to the stomach. So once we have the stomach meridian, what it's really saying is the root of all emotions are started in the stomach. So you have something, there's a sense that comes in from the exterior in the lungs. We digest it with the large intestine, and then we have an emotional response to that. And once we have that emotional response, if we have too much stimulation or not enough stimulation, you often see kids that are, almost blank, don't have any expression. This would be a deficiency in maybe the stomach meridian, or an excess would be a baby which just goes into pure rage and temper tantrums, unable to control those emotional states. And then what happens is the spleen comes in, and it makes an intellectual understanding and rationalization of it. It's like, I wanted that blue lollipop because I want that. It can express itself, but the heart is not really there yet. It's kind of, its soul isn't really there. This is just kind of a way that the baby is moving towards child, is adapting and understanding the way things are. And really what comes into the importance of sovereignty is when the heart comes into play. And as you are a baby, maybe an infant going to school for the first time, it's like, do you have sovereignty to make choices for yourself? And in the home, you may have worked out, what to say to get mummy to do what you want, and with daddy to do what you want, siblings and so on and so forth. And now you've got all these other kids in the class, and how do you deal with them? And the small intestine comes along and it says, don't worry, there are certain rules for home and certain rules for school. It sifts and it sorts. It says, there's sophistication here. This is how we develop and understand sophisticated situations. When we have the stimulus from outside, digestion, then we have an emotional response to it. We have an idea about it. Then the heart comes in and says, where my sovereignty, what do I want? And then the small intestine says, there are certain situations where you may not get what you want. And this is more to your point of how you deal with life, which is too much, or life which doesn't get where you want. It's like, what you want is to be the sovereign ruler of your life, but you don't want to be a tyrant. And if you're a tyrant, you're trying to control everything outside of yourself, which makes this whole process of where you can work with your own control and fascist tendencies, no matter how nice and kind it might be and how you disguise it in flowery language, it's coming back to, can you be the sovereign of yourself and want what you want and not know if you're going to get it, and be okay with how it is not to have it. And if you can't, it becomes a tyrannical situation. It becomes a difficult situation you can't control, and it creates stress. And then what the bladder channel and the kidney channel do is they give you boundaries, and they set the alarm off if the boundary is set. So unless you have a monstrous, ferocious border guard, if you don't have that, you'll have anxiety. Because if you don't have boundaries, when someone else's tyrant comes and affects you, you're not going to be able to protect your own boundaries, and you're going to work and work and work. And if your boundaries are set too low, then your alarm system is going to keep on firing. And in that situation, you're going to be stressed all the time, and it's going to be terror all the time. And then what happens is the last stage comes in with how we adapt to that. So what will happen is the pericardium meridian will come in and say, we call it the organ of sanity. But it's the organ of sanity when it's working with pathology, but it's the organ of faith when it's working in physiology. What normally happens is it says, I can surrender to my heart. I can surrender to the sovereignty of my heart, and the experience we're having is fine. If it could be horrible, it could be, it doesn't matter. We can have the faith that the experience we're having is perfect. It's just the way the life is manifesting for us. But if it's not, and it's tormenting us, it says maybe the nature of who we were brought up socially is wrong, and it will then try and adapt and change our own intrinsic nature. So before we used to be assertive and aggressive, and we got lonely because nobody wanted to speak to us. And now it says, don't be assertive and aggressive, be nice and kind. And now we will then make choices based on being nice and kind. And the intolerableness of if you make a choice not based on your nature, you're making a choice based on who you think you should be. What's the point of living? And this is where we start getting suicidal ideation, addiction. Like the only way you can be yourself is when you're drunk. The only way you can be yourself is when you are tired and exhausted. The only way you can be yourself is when you deplete yourself. You may deplete your current account so that it can't suppress you anymore, and then you only feel free when you can run away from it all. And we have a fantasy life, or we may play computer games, or we may do drugs, or we may do alcohol, because there is no contentness in our intrinsic nature. And then lastly, what happens is the stress of that situation becomes so intolerable, our psychology breaks. And then we have psychosis, we have suicidal ideation, multiple personality disorder. And this model I find is very helpful for understanding emotions from a Chinese perspective. If there's no wrong emotion, but our need to adapt out of something, will eventually lead to long-term pathology. But if we can come back to all of that, we can say, this emotion is mine, I own this. And then we look at the judgment we make about it. It's like, well, it doesn't matter whether it's wrong or right. There is a judgment there about wrong or right, but it's mine. And then really emotions are, when you feel them, they are just movements within your body. So if we look at from a Chinese perspective, I don't like to say anger. I'd say wanting something and not knowing how to get it. Because if you want something and you don't know how to get it, you can react with tears, you can react with excitement, you can react with aggression. There's all different ways you react, and your culture and your nature will react in all these different ways. But ultimately, if you want something and don't know how to get it physically, the energetic movement of that will rise. So physically, you will get maybe headaches, or you might get raised blood pressure, you might get red eyes, you might be nauseous and vomit. You might get all of these things, hypertension that's coming on from all of these kinds of symptoms. And really, it is just the conduction of the movement through you. And once it's moved through you, it's moved through you. The Irish say, I feel a sadness upon me. They don't say, I am sad. They see it's like a movement of energy that moves through us. And that's really a way we describe it within Chinese medicine. But if it's wrong, we then resist, and then we will have to try and use tension to change the directionality of this. So now if we say good little boys should never be angry, now when we have this movement of energy coming up, we may try and stop that by locking the neck, locking the shoulders. And now we have this perpetual tension that becomes our posture. And then what happens is the instead of getting raised blood pressure, when we resist it and make the energy go down, instead someone will step on our foot and spit in our eye, and we will suddenly feel like we may need to go to the loo. We may feel prolapse. We may get and emotionally, what may happen is we may feel very down and very low.
Yeah, because that's what you're doing with that energy anyway. You're directing it downwards, like you say. You're suppressing it, and therefore
usually through shame and guilt. And then eventually what you'll do is, if you can't take responsibility for it, you'll project it out into the world, and you'll say, the world is such an angry place. People just step on my foot and spit in my eye for no reason. They're so bad. I'm completely innocent. I have no responsibility to this emotion whatsoever. And sometimes people do just stamp on your foot and spit in your eye. There are malicious people out there.
Yeah, for sure.
You take any kind of responsibility away from it. It means that you can very freely give it to everyone else, or you turn it in yourself, and it's like, I'm so evil. Everyone deserves to spit in my face and stamp on my foot. You know, I'm the worst. And suddenly you get these knots that come through that means that you get very stuck. So a lot of this work I view is, it's like combing, helping people comb. This is what the story represents. The story reinforces these patterns. So the more you tell yourself something, the more your body will respond to that, and the less maybe the more guilty or shame you'll feel, or the less responsibility you'll take, and you will be stuck, powerless to change anything. And that would be the cause of disease from an emotional perspective, from a Chinese model.
Wow. Gosh, I don't even know how to start with that. We could probably spend the rest of the night talking through all those points, but it's so important. I mean, coming back to where we started with this, in terms of, because it was a huge question I asked in terms of overcoming this sense of despair and having better acceptance and better digestion, but it really is about that. And I like what you said, the example that you gave of the Irish saying, I feel a sadness come over me, rather than being defined as sad. I am sad. It sounds so definitive when you say, I am sad, I am angry, I am happy, I am. We say it all the time, don't we? We say, I'm excited, I'm buzzing. You know, when I say that sometimes.
A diagnosis, a label to put it all on. I am ADHD suffering. I am IBS suffering. I am this. And when we define ourselves by our disease, and some people love that because it means, oh, there's an explanation for it. And the lovely thing that Chinese medicine has to offer is a story of what illness is, and how it gets worse to death, and how it comes back into relationship again, and how it comes back into a sense of being the author of our own story again. In Chinese medicine, we have the paradox of free will and destiny, which sounds terribly confusing, but we have both.
But
the Chinese would say we always have the free will to deny our destiny.
Yeah, sure. But I actually think you say that, and that is a paradox, and there's a definite tension there between, okay, what is the path, so to speak, that I'm to follow, that I'm called to follow, but then where's my choice in all this?
This is the Daoist problem. As soon as I tell you what to do, I'm a tyrant. What the hell do I know?
Yes, exactly.
And if you need, this is what the Daoist is saying, you need to explore the laboratory of life, with your body as the laboratory, and explore your meaning and find what's important, find your nature. And in that process, you will find your curriculum unfolds.
Yes, absolutely. And I find a lot of resonance in this. I'm coming from, as you know already, I'm coming from a Christian perspective, and I actually find the same paradox. I find the very same paradox where it says in the New Testament about Christ talking about taking up your cross and what it means to take up your cross. And I very much believe that sounds kind of morbid, because you think of going to your own death, carrying the instrument by which you are going to be crucified, to be tortured to death. But it's not like that. It's really, like you say, it's about a curriculum. It's about a path, and choosing that actually I'm going to take this up. And you spoke previously. I saw one of your videos on YouTube, which I found really interesting, and it relates very much to what we're talking about now, in terms of focusing on, in terms of, I suppose, finding your curriculum. But you mentioned about focusing on what you're naturally interested in and how it changes your body as you do. So as you focus what you're naturally interested in, what you're naturally drawn to, that changes your health as well. You know, that idea, like you say, about following your destiny. And I suppose, I mean, the analogy I kind of use with the people I'm working with as a mentor in helping people to do this for themselves, because I talk to people about creating lives of purpose, meaning, and fulfillment, but I absolutely do not promise to bestow a purpose upon anybody. I give them, I ask the questions, I give them the tools and the frameworks to be able to help them along the way so that they can get on their way in doing that. But very much it is this idea of, you know, what is it that you're really naturally interested in? And specifically, what are you interested in learning about as well? What do you care about? What do you care to learn about? Not even, you know, I know in the I think it's the Japanese, they have that ikigai model where you think about, you know, what I like, what I'm good at, what the world needs, what I can make a living out of, and all that. I think that's great. But I think before we get to all that and make it too algorithmic, we've just got to get started with what people actually are naturally interested in. So it sounds like there's a lot of resonance there. And I do think there is an awful lot of resonance and relation between what you're looking at from a Taoist perspective and what's already available in the West, so to speak, from the religions that are predominant or have been predominant in the West, things like Christianity. But I just think that the meaning's buried in those traditions and in those scriptures in a way that isn't necessarily as accessible to people. So they focus on the very superficial things, or they focus on the more obvious things without thinking, okay, well, what does it mean? You know, it's very easy for Christians to become herd animals, for example, and just kind of go through the motions of the rituals and do what they're told without actually digging deeper into the scripture. And I found this myself, and I've had to take ownership of this myself and think, well, okay, Tom, you know, you say you believe in this. What do you understand of it, and how are you going to take ownership of it and to really apply it into your life? So this is really interesting, and I think this is a big part of what you're talking about in terms of digestion, and in terms of just allowing yourself to feel things, and sense making is really about looking at the breadcrumbs along the path, would you say, and trying to derive meaning from that. How would you agree or not with that?
I mean, it's a very dangerous question. It's very easy to become a tyrant of other people answering a question like that. And again, it's something that it's like the paradox of working with healing, and it's like in Taoism there's a main tenet which is non-interference with people. But as a part of Taoism, they're part of the training. There are 5 main pillars. One of them is healing, and so as a Daoist priest or a monk, I'm not anywhere there, but they get trained to work as a healer. But their main tenet is non-intervention. So you have again this paradox of how do you work as a healer without intervening in people? And to take away someone's authority is very dangerous. And it's very interesting that you talk about following what is interesting. The idea that we have control over that is very funny. It's like we can control our interests. You know, we can't really. No. I mean, it's really, for me, this is the journey into the heart.
Yeah.
And the heart wants what the heart wants. Yes. But if you want the difference between tyranny and sovereignty, for me, is very important in that journey. And so it's simple to tyrannize yourself and tyrannize the world. The world's wrong. It should be something else. It shouldn't be like this. It's too hot. It's too smelly. It's too much toxicity. There's too much this. There's too much that. No, but your heart may be interested in solving something there. You may be interested in it. Yeah. Or the heart may be more interested in relationship, or the heart may be more interested in all these things.
Yeah.
The way we describe it in a more medical perspective and a more spiritual perspective, is we say that the heart meridian has 9 acupuncture points there, but you can never treat someone's heart because the heart is the sovereign ruler of someone. So how can you ever affect someone to change their mind, to change their heart? You can't. So we never treat the heart. We treat everything else, but we don't treat the heart. And what we're really saying, I think, is that we can't take responsibility for the choices people make. And the only power we have in life is through the choices we make. And the 9 points on the heart meridian are not there from a medical perspective. They're there from a numerological perspective. They're there because they're saying 9 is the most yang number. 9 is the most sovereign, therefore, number. And we talk about that in relationship to Feng Shui. The 9 heart palaces are the 9 compass points that you look at in Feng Shui. They represent the 9 things that generally you can involve with in your life. So if your curriculum is based up of a specific combination of things, we would say it's based up of a combination of these 9 things. So you have the palace of health. So in my profession, most of us are obsessed with the palace of health. And when we resolve our issues at the palace of health, we won't be healers anymore, because we won't need to be, because they're not interested in it anymore. There's nothing there left to resolve. We are a sovereign, we're in sovereignty. But as long as I don't feel sovereignty of my ability to control my health or the health of other people, I'm going to be stuck round and round, going around seeing patients again and again, trying to treat myself, trying to heal myself. The next palace is the palace of wealth. Do I have enough to survive? Can I live within my means? And if I can't live within my means, do I have the skill and the will to increase my means, or will I always be impoverished? Will I always, will I never have enough to meet the needs of my day-to-day life? Or will I be cursed to be a multimillionaire who is always hungry, always needs more, and can never get more? And the next palace is the palace of prosperity. How do I share my wealth? How do I share my resources? It's like, hey, look at my brand new car, don't touch it. And it's like, I have wealth, but I don't have prosperity. I have that inability to share that with people. And it's a sequence, because the next stage, once you have health, wealth, and prosperity, the next stage generally in the heart's journey is relationship. Because if you have any pathology in your own health, wealth, and prosperity, you're not going to have the capacities to meet someone in relationship, because you'll always be looking for someone to fix your health, wealth, and prosperity, or see them as a threat to your health, wealth, and prosperity. So once you have a surplus into these, once you are the sovereign ruler of each of these palaces, it allows you to have the capacity to have a relationship. And in that space, you're going to meet all the difficulties that come up with relating with other people. It's great stuff. And you may have difficulty in that palace. It may take a while to deal with the palace of relationship, because in that palace, you're going to come to grips with all. And this is all the stuff that we meet in our lives. And if we can't overcome be a sovereign in one of these palaces, we call it a heart pain. This becomes the cause of our suffering until we have sovereignty over that particular palace. The next palace will be the palace of children or creativity. Which marker do we leave down to set down to say, I was here? It may be that I am the first person to write a book on this particular subject. And it's like, yeah, I was here. I did that. I achieved. But it's like, it's the case of, being a part of the great chain of being, of bringing the next generation in, and being a sovereign of that, and being able to be fertile, being able to bring the next generation through, to go forth and multiply. And once we do that, we look at the global palace, and we start looking around us at the world, and we start looking around us at other people in the world, and really we travel. We might try to find other things, because we hate our place. We don't like this culture. We don't like this, but it's much better over there. And really what it's saying is, no matter where you go in the world, it doesn't really matter, because people are just people. It's like, but there is an intrinsic humanness wherever it is. And can you call home wherever you are? Can you find family in whatever culture it is? It's giving you that opportunity to kind of explore the world. You might be interested in the news all the time, and the suffering, and there's so much pain in this. I can't do anything, but it's really kind of just letting us know that the world is a reflection of us, and can we be at peace with ourselves?
Mm,
And then we have the
mm,
palace of vocation. Can you earn a living through means that don't insult your morals and your values? Can you can you earn money in a way that is in alignment with what you believe to be right? Do you have the wisdom or the skill to earn a living which is in alignment? And it's rare that it happens, but it happens. And the last one, well, the last two, the palace of meditation. Do you have the wisdom to know yourself? Do you have the wisdom to understand your intrinsic nature, to understand what you're stressed about, to soothe yourself when you need to be soothed, and to push yourself when you need to be pushed? And the last one is the palace of the ancestors. Are you ready to take your place? Are you ready to, is that enough? Can you go home now? Can you lend? And can you take your place in the great chain of being and become the ancestors for the next generation? And that would be the way we break down a way of looking at, again, it's a model, so it's useful to remember that it's a model, but it can be helpful to give you maybe clues as to which part your interest may lie and which part your difficulties may be, and where you're going to have challenges and where your skills may be that give you ease in those areas. And that would be the model that we use within Chinese medicine to understand those kinds of things.
yeah, yeah. And it's useful to think of it as a model as well, because that gives us something to think about, and we can look at our lives and ourselves through those different contexts, like you say, because they are different, but there is an interconnectivity between all of those things. I think going back to your point as well about being a tyrant or not being a tyrant over someone
Yeah, I
else's
think
life
that's
is,
essential in understanding this.
yes,
Can you be a sovereign of wealth without being a tyrant of wealth? Can you
exactly.
be a sovereign of the global palace without being a tyrant and needing to change the world because it's wrong?
Yes, exactly. I think the more and more I get into my own work in mentoring, the more and more I feel that what I'm actually doing is showing people choices. is basically
Yeah,
saying, okay, these are choices that you can make, and this route based on this principle is probably going to lead in this direction, and this is kind of the direct antithesis. And of course, there's stuff in between, because very rarely do people do entirely an exact principle or entirely the antithesis, but it's essentially about giving people choice so that they can obtain that sovereignty for themselves and feel like they've made that decision, and then they're not taking that decision because somebody else has said you should do it, you should do it, thou shalt kind of thing. It's kind of like
yeah,
going back to my own kind of Christian basis, if you like. It started off with Moses in the Old Testament, who came along with the 10 Commandments, said, these are the 10 Commandments, it's full of thou shalts and things like that, because that's where the people were at that particular time. And then Christ
yeah,
came along and said, well, actually, I'm here to complete the law. And actually the all of the commandments can be circumscribed into two great commandments: love the Lord thy God with all thy heart, might, mind, and strength. And number two, love thy neighbor as thyself. And then where does that leave you? Well, good grief. if you think about it like that, that takes a great deal of figuring out, because that relates to everything about you. Like you were saying, from the Chinese perspective, it's everything about you in terms of how you think about yourself, how you think about other people, how you think about all these different situations, and then how you speak and how you act as well. So there's so much going on, and ultimately it's down to the individual to make the decisions. And I suppose that's the teacher's role, whether in your capacity as a healer, in my capacity as a mentor, teacher, speaker, whatever, to show people kind of the principles and help them to make an informed choice. I think that's what it is. I don't think it works going around wagging fingers at people and saying, don't do drugs because drugs are bad. Because yeah, sure, they are going to have a detrimental effect for a lot of people, and they certainly have done. But I think I think the greatest service that a lot of healers can do, whether they're healers in terms of healers of the body, technicians, or teachers, is to give people the information, to give people good information, good sound information, and to help them make choices on the basis of that for themselves.
Well, to jump off on that point, I mean, the way we describe the kinds of intervention within Chinese medicine, we would say that there are technicians, there are teachers, and there are shamans. Shaman's a bit of a difficult word because it has a lot of different connotations, but this is more of a technical term in Chinese. So a technician you'd go and see, and you'd say, I've got this ailment. And they would say, oh yes, come and see me 3 times. It's a very simple treatment. I will treat you. It's called liver qi stagnation. And you say, I've got headaches. And they say, well, the qi is stagnated. The liver is governing the qi. We need to move the qi of the liver, and therefore your headaches will go away. Come and see me 3 times. It will be cured. The teacher, you'll go and see the teacher, and the teacher will say, well, the stagnating liver qi is happening for a particular reason. What's going on in your life at the moment? Is there emotional stress? How are you relating with that? Let me help you understand the cause of this condition. Let me help you understand why this has taken place and teach you to see those signs yourself so that you can be much more of a sovereign in your own life. And then lastly, you have the shaman, and you go to a shaman and they may wave a colored piece of paper and your headache goes away, or they may make you smell something. Oh, it's disgusting, but the smell is gone. And they can't explain what they do and why they do it, because it's like as soon as they explain it, they become teachers. And as soon as teachers create a formula for doing that, they become technicians.
Yeah.
So it's like my mum, she had this, she's a psychotherapist. She had this client whose son was wetting the bed all the time. It must have been an early teen or something like this, and was going through, I think it was like Lithuania or somewhere. And they heard about this wise woman, and so they went up to her and asked to if the son could cure the son's wetting the bed. And the lady looked at him, got a huge pan, put it over his head and bashed it repeatedly, and the son never wet the bed again.
Wow.
Now
that told him.
Well, now I could tell you why that worked.
Right.
So I from a Chinese medical perspective, then what happens is the pathology that comes in is because the senses get obstructed. So by grasping and pushing away things, we get obstructed in these areas. When you have shaman, they tend to work in ways that open up the sensory orifices, which is why hallucinogens, this is why aromatherapy, sound therapy, color therapy, massage therapy, all nutritional therapy are all the most powerful forms of medication. Medication. They're all the most powerful ways to intervene because they open your doorways of perception, so you see the world differently, so change can take place. The same person that gets the disease can't be the same person that cures the disease. I've just degraded that experience. I've turned it into a teaching experience. Now what you do is you go out there and you bash things, and you work it through, but it's like, it's not you. You haven't met that. You haven't had that understanding of that wise woman who met that kid and in that moment related with them in a way that just totally changed his life.
Yeah.
And what you might do, or what I might do, is teach that to the NHS. And so now the NHS have 5 grades of pan. They have a 2 mil pan, a 4 mil pan, a brass pan, a tin pan, and they have various wooden spoons, metal spoons, ceramic spoons. And then they kind of, okay, little Johnny, come in, saucepan on the head, bang, 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 bang. Okay, come and see if that works. If not, we'll upgrade to the 8th gauge pen. You see, this is the way that things tend to work, to engage. And so the more we can explore being a very present, very conscious with the patient in that moment and engage with relating with them. So if you look at the start of the way shamans evolved, a lot of it evolved into, for example, Chinese opera. And what would happen is they had particular masks. And so if someone had a particular, we describe the kind of element, the constitutional makeups of people as 5 different kinds of elements. So if someone looked at you and they saw you maybe as being a metal element, metal is interesting because metal, you would say that the fundamental way that the metal maybe relates to God is through truth. They see truth as being the fundamental, most important. It's like a pantheon. It's like, so Earth's most fundamental aspect of what the highest thing they would aim for may be community and the importance of community. Treat thy neighbor like thyself. Whereas someone who's related to wood, it would be about the most important thing is the will to push through and the will to succeed and the will to live and the will to dominate and control. and that would be their aspect of maybe the wrath of God or the righteousness of God.
Mm.
But if they see and someone is stuck and they are not in their nature, then the person may the shaman may have tools. If they can't conjure that energy of that particular element, what they might do is do an element that is aggressive to that. And they might put a mask on. So if that person is metal, they might put another element mask on that is antagonistic to it, and they will get in the person's face and start messing with their head, start doing crazy shit around them that is in a way that is very the element that opposes them, to break them out of that place.
Right.
And that would be a very profound aspect of healing, but you can't talk about it, because as soon as you talk about it, you become a teacher. And as soon as you explain it, they understand it from that perspective. You've taken away the opportunity to engage with a fundamental, the highest possible way that they can heal.
Interesting. I wonder if there's a crossover where you can get hybrid healers, where they can be part technician, part teacher, and part shaman.
Well, often it's a way that people learn. They might learn as a technician. They have to learn as a way of getting, and eventually they reach a point where they can explain what they're doing to everyone, and then they reach a point where they realize that the explanation takes away from the actual moment and the actual medicine. And you often see that with massage therapists or psychotherapists, where you ask them, the really experienced ones, what they're doing. They do something really strange, which has an astounding effect, and afterwards they can tell you what happened. If you ever ask them before what they're going to do, they probably couldn't say, because as soon as they say, they're out of the moment. They're not relating to the patient anymore, which is where it takes place. So, my teacher says, my teacher is a guy called Jeffrey Yuen. He's a Daoist priest of 2 different schools of Taoism, and he lives in New York, and he travels around the world teaching. Basically, he hates doing it, but that's his that's his mission. So that's what he does. And he talks about the same person that gets the disease can't be the same person that cures the disease. That intrinsically, all the choices that you've made have led you up to where you are, and you need to be a different person. You need to make different choices if you're ever going to be able to cure a disease. And so that's fundamentally, it's like we ask we talk about healing, but what is actually healing? And it's a very strange thing. It's very difficult to answer. I torture my students with it. It's like, what the hell are they trying to do?
Yes.
And one definition of healing from a Chinese perspective, healing is change.
Yes.
Which is a very strange thing to relate with. Because a lot of the time in the West, we kind of assume that we want to be, we want to make ourselves permanent, or make it we might have this aggressive, progressive kind of way we're aiming to get somewhere and things like this. But there's also this thing of, not wanting to die, not wanting to let go, not wanting to have a bad experience, wanting to control it all. And we come back to the real fun nuances, which we can talk around. But really, until we have the direct experience, it's like, how do you change your mind?
Yes, that leads on beautifully to where I wanted to wrap this up, Tim. In relation to a comment that you made on a YouTube video that you did. It was a seminar that you ran a few years ago, and you talk about something called psychosclerosis. If people can't change their mind, then they can't be healed. And you also said there's no such thing as incurable diseases, only incurable people.
These are all lines from my teacher, Jeffrey Yuen, and his line of psychosclerosis. It makes me laugh every time. The hardening of the attitude. It's that process that we lock around, and he's has some very interesting ideas about this, because this is really what we're talking about, the shamanic way of changing, being able to change our mind is being able to change the way we perceive the world. And so the lovely thing about Chinese medicine is that it's applied philosophy. So all the stuff that you're engaging with in the philosophy or religion, you can work with technical protocols to treat, which sounds really weird. There are acupuncture points that you can use to help dealing with doubts of God. I personally would say that's a very dangerous way to go. But we have ways of understanding and therefore ways of interacting and ways of helping almost any condition that anyone has, whether it be a physical or spiritual or psychological condition. But ultimately, the person has to do the work themselves.
Yes.
The way we talk about psychosclerosis is like the aging process. Physically, when we are unable to deal with something, we silt up. We silt up the body. So typically, we might silt up the joints. So the body likes to hide things in the knees, hips, and shoulders to their deep areas where we have a lot of resources to contain a lot of stuff. So typically, arthritic conditions tend to get locked in these areas. And there's a story. Physically, what will happen is the body will try and push things out, can't push the things out because the acidity is so strong it will start damaging the structures of the senses. So it then locks the neck. And then now what happens is the body goes from a healing mode to a storing mode. So it fills everything up. And then what happens is that the overload reaches a point where now the body has to ventilate it out. So we'll use the bowels, the bladder, or the uterus to discharge and clear the pathology. And when it can't do that anymore, it will then cause inflammation in the internal organs, and then we die. It's a fun story. But it's like that's the physical ways that we get ill. But psychologically, if we are overwhelmed, we talked about the psychosocial load, the description I gave before. It's a way of understanding the way the mind silts up. And aging is basically we run out of storage space. So, so as a consequence, all these other inflammatory processes kick in because the body is unable to cope with the everything moves out of adequacy and it moves into surplus. Well, we don't have surplus, we don't have adequacy, we move into deficiency, and so we don't have the resources, so we store all the pathology rather than digesting them.
Yeah.
And now you can't have an argument with anyone anymore without getting angry. You don't have diplomacy anymore. You start moving towards grumpy old man status, which is kind of where I am. The lack of diplomacy happens because I become very rigid in who I think I am and the way the world is and the way people should be, and I become psychologically stuck. And until I can break open those ways, until I can have a radical way of waking up, a radical way of coming to my senses. So the example my teacher uses is the example of multiple personality disorder.
Yeah.
So someone can have insulin-dependent diabetes in one personality, no diabetes in another personality. You can be allergic to bee stings in one personality and non-allergic to bees. So there's a classic case of a psychiatrist where they were having a patient with multiple personalities. A bee came in, stung the patient. The patient was intolerant to bee stings and went into anaphylaxis. He didn't have an EpiPen with him, so he changed the patient's personality, and all the symptoms went away. Went and got an EpiPen, came back, changed the person's back again, all the symptoms came, injected with the EpiPen, saved them. So my teacher has a senior student who's a professor of dentistry in New York, and she does pro bono work at the local prison. She did blood work in both different personalities of this same prisoner. And in one personality they were HIV positive, another personality HIV negative. They wrote it up for the American Journal of Medicine, but they didn't want to know, because how can you make a medicine based on that? It's impossible.
Yeah,
but
exactly.
The principle is very interesting. If you change your mind, you change the disease.
Yes.
So as you break through all the things that you are keeping you locked in a way of seeing yourself, of seeing the world, or the stories we tell ourselves, the trauma that we have, and that trauma it's not a bad thing. It's there because we were overwhelmed.
Yes.
So to break it so quickly and to break it so violently and to really try and fix all of your difficulties in one go, it will probably cause more harm than good.
Yes.
What needs to take place is you need to respect the person's resilience. You need to respect the person's digestive capacity. And when they have a surplus, they will go into a relaxed state. In a relaxed state, they will start to digest. But we tend to be heroic in the West. We tend to think that we've got to fix it all straight away. And it's so bad. We shouldn't have trauma. We do have it. Is it okay just to be traumatized a bit? Because that's where you are.
Yes.
And then you have the difference, particularly in the East and the West, or if you look at kind of other modes of understanding like spiral dynamics or integral therapy and all these kinds of things, they talk about horizontal enlightenment and vertical enlightenment. They talk about, the need to progress and evolve, to aim for something that's important, to work with the capacity to sort of, I don't know, come into alignment with God. And the more you do that, the more like God you become. And the further away you are, the more you see God sternly judging you, until eventually, God becomes your enemy. If you have such a high aim and you're so far away, it becomes a horrible tyrant.
Yes.
And then you have in the East very much about this kind of sense of you can attain enlightenments right now. Right now, every day you have opportunities to work with waking, dream, and deep sleep, witness consciousness, Toryatita, these different states of consciousness where right now you have access to. Any baby has access to. You don't need to be Gandhi. You don't need to be, a spiritual master at something. You have it every day you engage with.
Yeah. I love that. I love that. That
highfalutin ideas.
no, I love that. I love the idea that anyone can have that enlightenment at any point, because it frees us from the enslavement of status and all these, like we say, these labels that we get hung up with. I should be this, I should be that, I'm old enough now to know better. All these things
and
that
at the same time pick up the cross, get marching, and oh, look at that person, they're nearly at the top of the hill, they must be so good. Hey, look at me, I'm nearly at the top of the hill with my cross.
well, the funny thing is about that is that life is kind of like a game of snakes and ladders. And sometimes when you do look at people and you think, oh, well, look at how far ahead they are, something calamitous can happen, and it can all come crashing down, and the same can happen to any one of us. So I think it's very dangerous to try and, in our own heads,
sin of the Greek gods, hubris.
It's exactly. It's that idea that we actually have a clue what's really going on in the grand scheme of things, because we don't know.
And this is why not knowing is very much the antidote to a lot of these things. And it's the root of science, it's the root of artists, it's the root of mystics, it's the root of so much which is of importance. And the more you can be not knowing, the less tyrannical you will be in relationships, and the more you can be delighted and horrified with equal measure and entertained by good company. It's one of the best things that in life, to be around people who don't need to relate themselves as in terms of status, but they see you and it's like, oh, you're on that path, nice to meet you. I'm here, this is where I'm at, and I don't need you to be like me, and I'm not going to kind of follow you and pretend to be you. We can actually meet here, and healthy relating. Lovely stuff.
I love that, because one of the things that strikes me as a key difference between the Eastern outlook and the Western outlook is this idea of self-definition and how I define myself. One of the things that really changed things for me was when I stopped viewing myself as a competitor. I realized that actually I'd been kind of indoctrinated in the culture, in the society, from my upbringing in all these different contexts, to be a competitor, to be number one, to be first, to achieve, to succeed. And if I see myself like that, then guess how I see everybody else? Everybody else is a competitor to me as well. They're all trying to grab what I want. And life becomes very small and very lonely and very much a zero-sum game. But actually, when I change my outlook and my self-perception, I see myself as a creator who can build something, can create something through which to contribute myself. And that, by the way, you can do that as well. And it's going to be entirely different to what I create and what I'm learning about. And the person over there can do that, and they can do it, and so on and so forth. And we're all capable, like you said before, of following our program, which I believe does lead to creativity and ultimately to contribution through that creativity. Then we don't look at things so rigidly. We don't see each other as competitors. I don't think we need to be so angry, and we need to be so hostile, and we need to be so reactive to other people's emotions, or even our own emotions as well. I would suggest
that we do need to be angry, and we do need to be competitive, we do need to be hostile when we need to be.
But not unduly so. But not unduly so. That's my point. I feel that there is, in the West, there is this constant aggression, or this underlying aggression, this kind of menacing drive to always be number one, always be the best. And part of that is because of the world that we live in, for better or worse. You know, there are many good things to talk about in relation to the systems that we have, and driving towards quarterly earnings and things like that, and monthly reports and what have you. But I think we need to be careful as well that we don't get too entrenched in that, because I think when we do, then we see ourselves as competitors. Everyone else is a competitor, and the collaboration goes down. When the collaboration goes down, in the long term, the results tend to go down as well. And we're not able to collectively create and innovate and actually cross-pollinate our ideas, because it's like, I've got my little thing and I'm going to protect it over here, and you're doing your thing, but I don't want you anywhere near mine because you might steal it, and then that might harm me. So it's very interesting. It's been a fascinating conversation, this, Tim, and we could certainly from my point of view, we could go on all night. We should probably wrap it up now, for the sake of timeliness. But just before I do so, do you have anything? I have to say, you are probably one of the most anonymous people who has something valuable to offer that I've ever come across, because you're almost invisible online. Do you have anything that you can offer people who aren't based down in Totnes, Devon, in terms of your healing, in terms of your teaching, your mentoring? How can people benefit from what you've got to offer?
Well, I do work with people over the phone.
Okay.
So if people want to work that way with me, it's something that I can do. A lot of the practical sides of treatments, can be done, once you have an understanding of yourself, we can sort of find ways to create a schedule for people to finding locally sourced help where they are. The nice thing that Chinese medicine has to offer, as I said before, is an understanding of the story of wellness and a story of healing, and psychological and spiritual development are very they're very strongly related. So I help guide a lot of people in those sorts of ways. I'm doing local teaching at the moment, so I'm looking at the moment to do kitchen table teaching. So I'm working with like 3-4 people and just teaching them the basics of healing, the basics of all of these kinds of things, and seeing where that goes. I like to open to the unknown. So if people are interested in something, or if they have a group of people that want me to come up and teach, I also have several people I teach up in Newcastle sometimes, in Brighton sometimes, less so over COVID. But when students ask me to come up and to teach on subjects, I'm very happy to come up for a weekend or something to teach. So
super.
I kind of enjoy being anonymous, but it might be because I'm just a little bit lazy with modern technology.
Yeah, well, I can certainly give testimony to the benefit that I've received from your healing treatments, and also from the discussions that we've had as well about the philosophies and the different approaches. Because what I love about Chinese medicine, my wife is an acupuncturist, as you know, and I've benefited somewhat vicariously in getting the breadcrumbs from her proverbial table, so to speak. But what I appreciate particularly about Chinese medicine is the holistic nature of it, like you say, and that's come through this conversation today, is that it is holistic. It isn't just about being a technician and saying, okay, I've got a headache, fix the headache, and that's it. It's about looking at the whole person over the longer period of time. It isn't about short-termism. It isn't about the quick fix. It's about the whole person over the longer period of time. And that's what I love about it, because I do feel as though it is geared towards leading people towards their sense of purpose, their sense of sovereignty, without telling them you should be X, Y, or Z. It's guiding them to that path and helping their body, mind, heart, and spirit be in harmony with each other, but also being in harmony with divinity as well, which I think is priceless. And it's not something that we see much in the world today, with the high focus that we have on rationality and getting results like now, and being able to quantify them on spreadsheets as well.
Well, if we can find the adequate way through, that sounds wonderful.
Super.
And if I can help people, I'd be delighted to try and help people.
Super. Well, thanks so much for your time. It's been an absolute pleasure, Tim.
Thanks for giving me the opportunity, Tom.